and hopefully we will get a lot of your questions answered today so we can all move smoothly into phase 1.5. And if I could have Dr. Jonathan Kanuka to give us some information and present some information for our panelists and guests.
Hey, good morning. Thanks all for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and information that hopefully will be helpful for your needs. And I just wanted to pull up a couple things on our website. Some of you may have already been here and seen some of this, but if you go to our COVID-19 webpage, if you go about halfway down, there's an area that relates to schools that you can click on, and there's some information there that may be relevant and helpful for you here. If you click on the amount of cases by county or zip code, you can kind of get an idea of what's going on in your own backyard. So this first section here is information that's being given to school leaders. I believe it's this one. Let me just pull it up here. Yeah. So this kind of gives a disease activity for school districts as they're thinking about what their disease activity looks like and what their risks are as they reopen and have students come back to their classrooms and things they need to think about. So we put this out every single week on a Monday and then kind of assess each county what their risk is based on what the trend has been for the number of cases over the last couple of weeks, the number of people that we test, how many of them are positive, and kind of break it down and give people a little bit of an idea. As you can see here, the entire state is lit up as blue for being, kind of high for recent disease activity. Nobody's in the low category, but it breaks down, how many people per population there are, what's the trend, if it's high or low, and the percent positive, if it's high or low. So you can see that our percent positives, it's essentially anything over 10% is considered high, and only Oconee County has a percentage less than 10% are testing positive when they go get tested for COVID-19. We're at a record, averaging a statewide about 20%. Back at the end of May, we were sitting around 5%. So if we took 100 people back then, about 5 of them would be positive. If we take about 100 people now who want to get tested, 20 of them would be positive. So we have a lot of disease activity going on around our state. So if you want to see what's going on in your neck of the woods and what school districts might be looking at, that's where you can find that. And then you may have already seen, we have some links here as well about return of high school sponsored team sports guidelines. I believe, if my memory serves me right, this just links back to the SCHSL website. Yeah, it does. So I'm very confident you've been to this website and looked at the guidelines that are here. So just wanted to make you aware that these resources and information about disease activity in your particular area are available, that they are published, and you can go and look at what's going on in your county. And you can even go, if I scroll down, you can even look at what's going on at zip code level. So if you haven't seen it before and are curious, want to know, you can find information about disease activity in your area. As it relates to what's going on with the 1.5 guidelines, I think the major thing that I wanted to highlight and mention is, the 1.5 guidelines are allowing for sharing of equipment, sharing of, basketball or football or baseball or whatever. And I think the important thing there is to make sure that that equipment is getting sanitized after a practice or after an event. I think that before students are involved in doing a sporting event, they should, or practice, they should be, washing their hands and practicing good hygiene. So hopefully that would, reduce or mitigate the risk of transmitting whatever virus might be on their hands to whatever ball or equipment they may be touching. So practicing good hand hygiene and following what's in the 1.5 guidelines, I think will help mitigate that risk. I don't think, based on what we're seeing across the state, it's not realistic to think you're gonna have 0 cases. There's just so much going on right now across our state, and particularly in the 20 to 30-year-old age group. So we're doing our best to get our messaging out about wearing face masks, social distancing, physical distancing, washing your hands, and not going to school or going to work when you're sick. But I think as some of these activities are starting again, the goal can't be 0 cases. It's just not realistic. It's to reduce the number of cases and reduce the amount of harm that might happen. So I think, you guys have all been looking at that already, not just for the students, but for the families that come to to events, and how are they going to sit in a bleacher or a stand and keep their distance from other families and wear face masks, and the coaches wearing face masks and all those things. So I think it's really important to reiterate that message. And remember, that's the part that we can do. If I wear my face mask, I'm protecting you. If you wear your face mask, you're protecting me. And that's the way that we can bend that curve down. So those are my opening remarks. I'm happy to entertain questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kaneko. Next, we will have a brief introduction and presentation from Sheila Gordon.
Hi, I think we need to take this time to work collaboratively with our district administration and our health officials to address any kind of administrative concerns. And that takes us to the next point of establishing even a COVID-19 response team. So what does that look like in your school? What does that look like in your district? But we've got to take critical steps in order to advance the student athletes' return to campus and providing a safe environment for practice and competition. So at this point, we need to continue to prepare athletes for physical activity. We need to make sure that we continue to prepare them for the heat acclimatization concerns. We need to continue to practice for conditioning and practice session concerns. What does that look like? What kind of concerns are you having in your district? And make sure you talk collaboratively among the administrators and health officials in your area. But we've also got to carefully consider risk mitigation strategies for our campuses. So, you know, what does that look like as far as preparing our facilities each and every day? What does that look like to clean our facilities each and every day? What kind of materials should we be using, and how should we be doing that? So we can refer back to the CDC guidelines and figure out which kind of disinfecting materials and solutions we should be using and how to do that. What is your illness reporting procedures? We need to continue to promote wellness and hygiene. And just like was said before, we need to make sure that we teach these kids not only on our campuses, but you know, to go out into our communities and practice these same procedures there as well. And we also need to take this time to review our emergency procedures, our emergency plans. So I'll be glad to take any comments as you have them.
Thank you, Sheila. And now we will have some information from Commissioner Singleton.
Yeah, again, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. This virus continues to challenge us. You know, but because of that, we've got to continue to proceed slowly and cautiously. It's still important. Can't tell you enough. It's still important that we have opportunities for our coaches and athletes to get together. Still important that our coaches take the opportunity to help our athletes to move through the mental, the physical, and the emotional challenges that the virus has brought upon us. Phase 1.5, not much different than what we had in phase 1. Just added an opportunity to increase the number of participants in the group and be able to share the equipment a little bit more. We've got to pay attention to all the health issues, folks. I got to tell you, I can't tell you enough. We've got to pay attention to all the things, all the challenges that we have in trying to stay safe, health-wise, sanitation-wise. And I can't tell you enough, you've got to wear the mask. You cannot go out there and not wear the mask. You've heard both groups say, you've heard Dr. Jonathan say that that's important. If not for yourself, for everybody else. Let's take ownership of this. Let's do all we can to see if we can continue to progress through this. We're at 1.5 now. We're hoping to be able to move further. It's just another opportunity to increase the numbers and share the equipment. Let's work on this. You've got the information in front of you. We're going to take this opportunity to answer some questions for you. And let's take this thing serious, folks. Let's own it. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Commissioner Singleton. And thank you all for our membership for submitting some very thought-provoking questions. And I can tell you that the staff here took time to go through those questions, and we're definitely trying to stick with our phase 1.5. So if your question was submitted and not addressed today, please make sure that you know that we're going to get back with you on that, but we're sticking with our guidelines for 1.5. And to start those questions off, I'm going to just come out of the gate for one for Commissioner Singleton. And this question is, why are we resuming sports when we are in worse shape with COVID than we were when we canceled in March?
So we're not actually resuming. We're just continuing our summer workout periods. We always had the opportunity to do it virtually, and then we moved into where you could do it face-to-face. So it's truly not resuming. We're just still taking advantage of the opportunities that we have. It's still voluntary. Nobody can be mandated to do it. It's not required by anybody. I still make the same comment that it's so limited in any advantages being gained strategically. If we will recognize being able to meet with them and telling them to lift or run, or just teaching some basic drills with the equipment, then we could say that's an advantage. But those type of advantages always existed throughout the year, even during the school year, because some of you are able to offer those as classes. So we're very sensitive to the challenges that the virus has brought for us. But this is just an opportunity for us to get our coaches in front of those student athletes and be able to mentor them and help them to navigate through all the challenges that this virus is bringing forth. We truly recognize probably some of the best opportunities for us to be able to practice limited gathering and social distancing is when we have them at the school with the coaches that's making that as a requirement that those things occur. When they're not at the school, then we're going to have to depend on some outside entities to help us with that, and we have to depend on them, our student athletes, to take ownership and do those things themselves.
Thank you. This next group of questions is, I will address it to Charlie Winsky. They are centered around football. So first up, can you tell me, can we modify phase 1.5 to allow for helmets to be worn? And also another caveat to that is, can sleds be used during phase 1.5? Oh, you're
1.5 is not going to be modified to allow for helmets at this time. It says that clearly no protective equipment may be worn. Helmets are strictly used in the summertime and allowed for a safety purpose when we're having interscholastic events such as 7-on-7 or inter-team workouts. In phase 1.5, there is no defensive work against an offensive player, so the safety of wearing a helmet is not important at this time. We do recognize the importance of the helmet for the acclimatization, and that's something that we are currently looking at for when we would add a helmet into, but at this point, 1.5, we're not adding it in to start coming Monday. On the second part of your question, can sleds be used? The answer to that question is yes. 1.5 allows for equipment such as sleds in football and other balls or sporting equipment to be used inside those groups. So if you have a 5-man sled, potentially 5 players could be there using it. Now we recognize they're going to be inside of 6 feet. So if they're going to be inside that 6 feet, a mask needs to be on at all times. However, we don't want them inside those 6 feet with a mask on for an extended period of time. In other words, we don't want them driving the sled 15, 20 yards down the field, 5 men on a 5-man sled for an extended period of time. If we're going to hit the sled and roll, then get off the sled and move, certainly we're there for a short period of time in a short window. But remember, those sleds have to be cleaned down between uses. So from a programmatic standpoint, it would probably be much easier for a coach to rotate 3 players and 2 players in so that it can be cleaned less frequently, but also allow for more use in between different athletes. An arm shield was another question. Can we use an arm shield? An arm shield can be used. However, the person holding that arm shield needs to have on a mask. The person coming to hit that arm shield or to use that arm shield to get off the line of scrimmage needs to be using a mask. But again, that's got to be a very small window of time where there's contact. This can't be an arm shield to stop an offensive receiver from getting off the line by the defensive back, that the defensive back then follows them down the field, because you're running into a defense versus offense situation, which we've said no active defensive drills may occur against an offense.
Thank you. Our next question I'll direct to Sheila Gordon. The guidelines indicate that workouts should be conducted in groups of athletes with the same athletes working out together weekly to limit overall exposure. Does this mean that the groups can change weekly if needed or desired?
No, Tammy, at this time during 1.5, we need to maintain those groups. So once assigned, those same kids need to work out daily, weekly, and as far as the eye can see until we change to some other phase. So the purpose of this is really for contact tracing purposes. So if we do have someone that gets sick, then we can track who they've been around and when they've been around and how long they've been around that person. So the answer to your question is no, they should be working out with the same group of people every day.
Okay. And our next question is for Commissioner Singleton. Will students enrolled in virtual academies still be able to participate in athletics based on this?
Truly, again, as long as you are a student that's recognized at the school as being a student at the school, but if we're talking about virtual charter, or we're talking about homeschoolers that are not in school, again, the same rule applies for the eligibility if they live in that attendance area, and that's where they're eligible, so they'll be able to participate in these workouts.
And Ms. Gordon, I have another question for you. The guidelines note that all equipment must be cleaned after each use and not shared with other groups. Does this mean that groups cannot use the same balls or equipment from group to group, even if the equipment is sanitized between groups?
Tammy, we can share the equipment among members of each pod. After that pod leaves that area, all equipment must be sanitized, and then the next group of people can come in and use that same equipment, but it's got to be sanitized between each pod's use, but you can share the equipment within each pod.
Next question is for Mr. Winsky. How are we able to start phase 1.5 on August 3rd and then move to phase 3 2 weeks later with no restrictions?
Well, first of all, we're not saying we're moving to phase 3 2 weeks later. All along, our concept and our idea has been phase 1 was a modified workout that limited numbers and limited opportunities to work with balls and other sporting equipment to help keep the spread of this virus to a minimum amongst groups. Phase 2, the plan for phase 2 was to allow for larger numbers or potential entire team gatherings where the team could work together and potentially have inter-squad opportunities, such as, 5-on-5 in basketball inside the same school. Phase 3 was going to be interscholastic competition, whether that be 7-on-7, your summer 10 dates, or a game or competition or scrimmage once we hit the fall season. Obviously, the window for the 7-on-7 and a 10-date summer opportunity has passed us, and we're not even at a point where we're ready to get to those contests for school versus school. So our next phase from 1.5 would be a larger number of gathering of athletes on the same team from the same school and more access to equipment and what you can do inside of that practice. That would be potentially phase 2, which would be the first day of practice. Phase 3 would be when we start scrimmaging against other schools and other outside competition. So we're not moving from 1.5 to 3. We actually would be going from 1.5 to a full team practice.
Okay. Well, can you tell me how long do we anticipate doing the health and temperature screenings for athletes, coaches, and staff? And do you think that will extend beyond phase 1.5?
I think that's a great question. And I think Sheila could probably back me up on this, but it might be something we're looking at doing the entire school year. That's just a safety precaution for our student athletes, and anything that we can put in or we can provide or our schools can do to provide the best safety and health for our student athletes, it's something that we need to take into consideration and put forth. So if it's going to provide the safest environment or the most comforting environment for those coming in to feel like it's safe, then it's something we got to continue to do. So I think we're looking at anticipating that it's going to continue for the foreseeable future at this time.
And what safety concerns are there for districts who have yet to start a summer workout that will be able to go with no restrictions on August 17th?
Absolutely. There's always concern about that. And of course, we've got some districts that have not started yet. However, the thing to keep in mind is that summer workouts have never been a requirement. Schools have never been able to mandate that an athlete come. They've never been able to require that an athlete comes. In fact, that would be a violation of league rules to mandate or require a student come in the summertime. So the first day of practice is when they can actually mandate it and require that you attend if you want to participate in that sport. So this is no different than what that is. What is different right now is we have districts that have actually not started yet. So we've currently, in all of our planning and all of our processes, we are trying to account for those schools that have not started yet. However, we do recognize there are going to be some that still may not start when others start. And it's going to be up to each individual school and district to make sure if their students are not ready to go 100%, or they've not acclimatized, or they're not ready for competition, that they don't start on that first day. Nothing says you have to scrimmage the first day that scrimmages are allowed. Nothing says you have to have a competition the first day that competition's allowed. If you don't feel it's in the best interest from the safety and health of your students, that needs to be delayed. And certainly that's an understanding that people are going to have to start looking at, because it's not something we had to consider in the past as much. But we're in no different shape than we were in terms of the mandating of when students can be and have to be at practice.
Thank you. Our next question I will direct to Ms. Boozer. Do phase 1.5 guidelines for middle schools look any different?
The phase 1.5 guidelines that we have set out, it does say that, it's high school sponsored teams, but these guidelines are also in place for our middle schools. They simply follow these same guidelines. They were put in place for all levels of our teams, from varsity, sub-varsity, and middle schools. So these guidelines are to be followed by our middle schools as well.
Okay. And my next question is for Mr. Danny Brooks, and this is pertaining to the sport of swim. Many of the aquatics facilities have multiple pools. Are those considered as one facility?
That's a great question, Tammy, from the unique sport of swim. As stated there, many of the aquatic centers does have multiple pools. What we look at here from the lead is whether that structure is a permanent structure. And if they're divided by permanent structures, yes, we do look at that as two facilities within that one. We're not talking about a dock that you can swim underneath from one side to the other, or changing the lanes to try to create two pools. But if it's a permanent structure divider, then yes, that's multiple facilities.
Okay, good. That's good. That's good to know. Okay, Charlie, I'm going to come back to you with this question. One quick one. In basketball, can we run offensive sets within our groups?
Absolutely. As long as there's no active defensive play against that offensive set, you'd be able to. However, we would recommend that you try to keep athletes at 6 feet apart at all times, but we recognize the fact that inside an offensive set in basketball, that may not be entirely possible. You would actually extend beyond the parameters of the court. So if they're going to run, again, this goes back to the sled, the concept of a minimal time around each other. But if I know I'm going to come inside an offensive player inside of 6 feet, they need to have the mask on so that they're not in violation of the 6 foot without a mask. Run that set as long as they're moving and moving around and they're not standing stationary or within close contact for extended period of time. That would be acceptable under 1.5.
Okay, but even though groups can now share a ball and work on passing, setting, etc., with volleyball and offense and defense drills in football, does this mean that kids and coaches still have to maintain the 6 feet distancing while actively involved or participating in drills?
Yes, ma'am. It goes back to the thought process here. We're trying to give our schools a little bit more to do in 1.5 than they were. We recognize that they want to have a little more activity going on. Again, we're not in a period of where we are side by side or within 6 feet for an extended period of time. You can do that as provided you're wearing the mask and we're moving, and we're not creating any opportunities to increase the spread if we're not surrounding each other for an extended period of time. So we would allow that. Now the drill question becomes loaded, because what does that drill mean? Again, one-on-one drills are not allowed. I can't guard you in basketball while you dribble up and down the court, even though we're wearing masks, because that's an active defensive player. A coach playing defense, again, that's an active defensive player. We want to deter our sports from having active defensive involvement, whether it's a coach or an athlete. So we want to try to keep that distance down as much as possible. But an offensive set in football, an offensive set in basketball, in volleyball, if you read the explanations in volleyball, you can actually receive the serve, pass, and then attack from the offensive side and have back row player actually, defending that attack on the back row. Now, there would no be active play at the net in that situation in volleyball.
Thank you. And Commissioner Singleton, this next question for you. Can a coach work with multiple groups of athletes? And let me give you an example. If you have Coach A working with 15 athletes from 8 to 9, and then work with 15 different athletes from 9 to 10, is that possible?
While we would hope that a coach would be with just one group at all times, we understand that that's not feasible in a lot of cases. We would ask that coach limit as many groups as he possibly can that he would work with. I would hope that he wouldn't work with multiple groups because he or she may be the contaminator. So we've got to be mindful of that. And if there's ways that we can conduct these workouts without having to have the same person coming in contact with all the groups, that's what we prefer. But understanding the limitations that you do have and the number of athletes that are out there, we've got to say that is available. That opportunity is available. Again, we would ask that you do it very cautiously as you go through that.
And Ms. Boozer, back to you. Question. In the chart received, it states that competitive cheer shall remain under phase 1 guidelines. Does this mean that competitive cheer is still restricted to groups of 10 per facility?
I'm glad you're asking that question because we have received some calls and emails from athletic directors and from our competitive cheer coaches trying to get clarification. So with us moving to phase 1.5 for fall sports, so competitive cheer is a fall sport, that does allow for 16 to be in the group. The restriction that is in the guidelines is restricting them to no stunting, which was in phase 1 guidelines. So just the skill restrictions are the only thing that they're still having to follow under phase 1. But yes, competitive cheer can have 16 in the group. Remember that group does include the coach. So that would be 15 and 1 coach or however the numbers work out. But yes, that is 16 for the group.
Thank you. Mr. Winsky, can football use defensive backs and or linebackers to work on covering their drop zones while receivers run routes provided they all stay 6 feet apart?
No, that would be an active defensive play. And the risk there would be that those drop zones, if our drop zone becomes the flat and the receiver's route is into the flat, we're going to violate that 6 feet really quick. Even if you extend them back 10 yards to simulate what would be their drop zone, so you can simulate the receiver's routes, you're still running an active defensive play. And essentially, while I understand the concept of what they're trying to do and accomplish there, you're really risking the opportunity for kids to come in inside of that 6 feet. But the reality of it is it's defense versus offense there. We're really trying to keep this at individual skill development, not team development at this point. That'd be phase 2 would be we get to where teams are actually interacting with each other from an offensive and defensive standpoint. So if they want to work on drop zones, they need to do that versus air or with a coach simulating where the ball's going on the other side.
One more for you. Can a football coach run an entire 11-man formation for offense in phase 1.5?
Again, they could do that, provided that if they're inside of 6 feet, that they're going to have a mask on. But they have to understand that if I'm going to bring 5 linemen to run that offensive set, that those 5 linemen are going to be a part of that group for the remainder of that group's time. So they're not going to be able to roll those 5 to 7 linemen out to a new group to work on individual line drills. And then have your skill receivers. So you're going to limit, if I've got a quarterback and receivers and a couple running backs and 5 or 6 linemen, that's going to be my group of 16, including my coach, that they're going to be together from now until this group number extends. So you could be potentially limiting the opportunities to individually work with certain groups of players or work with players based on their specific positionings by doing so. They could do it. May make more sense to put cones out to simulate an offensive line so that you have your skills receivers out there. And then on the opposite side, bringing your linemen back on, put cones out to simulate where your receivers or split backs or tight ends would line up to help your linemen align their splits. But again, if they're going to get in that tight area, we don't want them there for an extended period of time. We don't want them contacting physically another athlete. And we do want them inside of 6 feet. We want them wearing the mask at all times.
Thank you. Well, that concludes the submitted questions that we are able to answer today. I would just like to give some additional information before I let Mr. Singleton close out. If you have a question that wasn't addressed today and you'd still like to speak with one of our panelists or one of the staff members, please remember to visit our website. You can just go to www.schsl.org and click on About Us. You have all of our phone numbers and emails there. You can also find a lot of information on the same website. Very top, we have a COVID red bar. That's all of our updates have been posted there since March. So there's a ton of information as well as connections to our South Carolina DHEC and even the governor's office and the State Department of Education. And I'll throw in there that if you don't want to call or email, we are available on social media, and we have a weekly Tuesday news that you get that anything, any update, anything that we have going on here in this office that's meant for you is included in that newsletter. And again, the website, this gathering today will be available after we close out today on Facebook. So we just have all avenues of communication available to you. So please, pick up the phone, call us, email us, anything that you'd like to do, we're here to serve you. Again, I would like to give Commissioner Jerome Singleton an opportunity to give some closing comments before we end today's Facebook Live.
So again, thank you for joining us. We're in phase 1.5. We're hoping to continue to move forward, but it's going to be very important that we're very, very intentional about how we're going to address this. We need you to do your part. We need you to continue to talk about what's going to occur away from the workouts. Why it's important that everybody play their role and take ownership to this. Hopefully we can move to 1.2. Hopefully we can move the 2.0. Hopefully we can move to 3.0. But it's going to require us to be able to go slowly and work our way through it. Let's not abuse it. There's a lot of opportunity now to abuse it because we're allowing you to kind of violate that 6 foot separation. Let's not abuse it. Let's be sure that we do it very cautiously so that we don't add, or the activities that we do doesn't contribute to the spreading of the virus. There's a risk. There's always going to be a risk. All of them have their risk. But from our end, if we do what we can while we've got them working with us, and we have conversation with them about what they need to do when they're not with us, it gives us our best chance. Monday is the first day you're going to be able to start this. Let's be very conscious about what we're doing. Let's take ownership to it, and let's do a great job at it. Let's be a role model for how this thing should be done. We believe we can get sports back off the ground, but we've got to do our part to make sure that everybody's doing what they should do. Again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate all that you do. Give us a call if we can be helpful.
Thank you, and that concludes today's online webinar. And again, thank you, Sheila Gordon, and thank you, Dr. Jonathan Kanuka, and our staff members with our assistant and associate commissioners. Have a good day, South Carolina.
Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you.